Here on the Creative Thinker Podcast, we discuss all theories, philosophy, and thought behind the creative process. And we hope that you find some inspiration along the way.
Across a forlorn landscape, our hero sees movement, crawling, scraping life emerging from the depths of the earth. A cold wind blows and it starts to rain. There's nowhere to run. He's in the middle of an open field. The city that serves as his salvation is miles away. And that is how we're going to start the vibe here on the Creative Thinker Podcast. Welcome, creative thinkers, free minds, and artists all over the globe as we are more increasingly allowed to be. We are graced once again with Michael Vasquez's presence, crowd favorite.
What's up?
What's up, Michael? How you doing today?
I am doing good. It's always a nice day when I can come and do a podcast with you. And I love being creative and talking about the creative process and the vibe that we're going to be creating today. Loving it.
Hells yeah. That couldn't have been more white. I'm sorry. We're talking about creating a Funkadelic vibe today. Grooving into the lyrical abyss. How you feeling? You good? You ready for this?
Yeah.
You
No,
vibing?
I'm ready.
Okay.
I'm vibing.
Okay. Thanks for wearing the same hoodie. Here we go. For those for those of you on the video, what's up? Good to see you. Okay. So the synthesis of today's episode is that every time you attempt to set a vibe for your story, you're going to be using different words, different pacing, and different plot points to explain the same basic situation. So when suspense, I think, is the easiest one. So let's start there.
Okay.
When you're setting the pace with suspense or a scary story, most of the good scary movies, like The Conjuring, right? They have so much lead up information. You probably haven't seen it.
No, I don't like scary movies.
But it's great. Okay, so most of the movie is spent with the family in the home trying to understand what's going on. Probably like 2/3. And then the last third, and then like a few minutes before that, sprinkled about is these like weird happenings. So we know that there's something wrong in the house. But like any good scary movie, you have tons of dead time where you don't see anything bad happen. It's just like it's a little bit dark down at the end of that hallway. The door twitched a little bit. They played a game where it's like clap tag. So like the person searching for people, hide and seek. That's what it is. Clap, hide and seek. So the person searching has a blindfold. They clap and then everybody claps back. And then so they go around the house and find the people clapping. And so at one point the entity in the home claps back. And so they go into this dark, empty room with only an armoire, and the doors creep open. And she thinks, I've got my sibling now. And she goes over and reaches into the darkness. And that's when as she says, I've got you, everybody runs in and sees that there's no one in there but her. And she thinks she's found someone. Anyway, very good movie if you like scary movies. I don't really. I haven't historically, but The Conjuring changed that. I saw The Conjuring, pretty recently, and it was like, this is dope. I'm going to start checking these movies out because, anyway, it's really good. So for suspense or horror, really, you need a lot of dead time. You need a lot of space at the beginning of the story to set the pace and give us A, something to lose, and B, something to worry about. And we need space for that. We need emptiness. Like a person who is busy is not going to be stressed out about too much. They're not going to have time to be anxious. They're not going to have time to be scared because their mind is on too many things. If you cut to the middle of an Avengers movie and said, here's something you need to be afraid of, like, we haven't given people enough time. Like action movie, that's great. You want a lot of pace, a lot of spectacle, a lot of people flying around. But for a scary movie, if you just launch some fear in there, there's one movie that's like that. It's like Final Destination, when they made like movie 97 or something, like however many there have been. It was just like, well, here's 20 people with a final destination. So you watch like 20 people die, and then it's been an hour and a half and you're done.
Yeah.
So it's not scary. You're not invested in stories like that because you haven't had enough time to be alone in the situation where the light is closing in on you and you're worried about what's in the darkness. So I think that's what's really cool about fiction, is especially written, is because we use an entirely different lexicon of words. We use an entirely different set of things that we describe. So if you walk into a room in a comedy, you might notice a hang in there poster on the wall.
Right.
Whereas if you walk into a room in a horror, you might notice that even though the window's open and there's tons of light in the room, there's a shadow coming from the closet. You know, there's just like the same shadow may be there with the hang in there poster, but we don't emphasize it. And I think that we almost have created our own fictional realities around each of these story tropes that make it really fun to sort of switch between. So I know you do a lot of D&D because I'm there with you most of the time.
Yeah.
So if you are, let's pick a couple of the easy ones since we said comedy and horror, and I know you've done both. How would you go about setting each scene? How would you change the way you introduce a scene?
Okay, yeah, for sure. And so again, with like, I always try and preface like D&D is special because I get live reaction and I can use music to help with the tone or the mood, and I can use my inflection and my inflection. Wow. Inflection of my voice and my words, which you can do in film. I would say like you can use the music, you can use, you know, people's tone. But that's how I would set up like something like comedy or something a little bit more lighthearted. You throw on some type of like D&D tavern music. You kind of start creating the vibe with your words. And even like right now, like I'm using my hands as like just kind of waving them around. Benefit if you can watch on Spotify. But like I can use my hand gestures and I can say like, you know, you see stuff going on over here. They're throwing drinks back. They're having, which is famous in our D&D campaign, axe throwing competitions. And, you know, just general rambunctiousness, right? I usually start talking a little bit more like this. I create a nice tone of like, you know, potentially music's going on and there's singing and there's this. And like, I try and create like a happy tone. Whereas when it's supposed to be more suspenseful, you can drop the tone a little bit more and be a little bit more monotonous. You can have music kind of going in the background, kind of like your introduction, right? And the suspense is created whether, you know, there are a couple different like rhythmic patterns that you could do, abnormal patterns. You can tell someone like you can dim the lights. You know, you built a really cool table that I can even change the lights on the table. So, you know, once it changes, I can change it from like this vibrant green to like more of a darker purple or darker red to set the tone and embrace the silence and the suspense as you're walking and you hear footsteps going here, and then you hear something abnormal, just a flutter over there. So that's how like you would create that the tonal shifts happen between comedy, lighthearted, and suspenseful. And of course, using the words that I was using of, even when you were describing, the person playing hide and seek with clapping, you hear the creak of the door, the dark room. You start using certain words and elements in your vocabulary to capture what you're trying to set up.
Well, I think you hit on something good there too with pacing of like, it just reminded me of the movie The Ring. I don't know. Have you seen that one? Oh yeah. You're not a scary movie person.
That okay. And growing up, I was not allowed to watch some of these movies. So once I knew they were scary, I was like, I'm going to stay away.
So The Ring, I was allowed to watch it. So no, my sisters were allowed, and I watched from underneath the couch.
Solid.
Snuck in to watch that one. So with The Ring, one thing that they do that's really cool is not only is the pacing is so stagnant. It's like it's musical, the precision of story beats. Mm-hmm. And so that feels so unnatural compared to life. You didn't even turn off your notifications on your phone, bro. So their pacing is so methodical that the world feels so stale. And I just remember thinking for The Ring 2, when I think it's The Ring 2. Anyway, The Ring story, to heck with it. And so she's talking to her son, and they have like what would be a fairly loving moment between mom and son. And it's so uncomfortable because the world is like, it's so like colorless and desaturated. And it's like the camera angles are like sort of like, from a child's angle towards the mom. So it's very like sort of up the nose shot, which is uncomfortable for us as adults to see of other adults. And then the shot of the kid is also like sort of further to the side than we'd like to be too. It's like we're always outside of the conversation. Everything about it is staged to be repulsive in some way. And it's like the story hasn't even really started as far as the girl in the well, right? So we're just already repulsed by a story element of really dry pacing that works on an emotional level to say we don't belong in this story. And then we get to the story element that really tells us that we don't belong, or the story element that doesn't belong with us. I don't know. Anyway, so I think with suspense, it's very important to allow people that silence, like you're saying. But for comedy, you don't want a lot of pacing. Like the screenwriting trope is one joke per page. A page is a minute of on-screen time. And I've heard people say that they're up to as many as like put 2 jokes per page and then just see which ones land.
Gotcha.
So it's like, and it's all kinds of jokes and joke structures, but it's 2 per page. Per minute of TV that you're watching that's supposed to be comedy now is supposed to have 2 jokes.
Wow.
And that's why most of them are bad. There's no setup, but that's the pacing is like you want it to be fast and lighthearted and sort of jazzy. It's like you raise the voices, everybody sort of overacts and like they do a lot of things with their shoulders and elbows for some reason. It's like that's our comedy range. And there's a lot more like falls are funny now, and like The Office is a great example of a component of comedy, which is I guess more modern comedy movies and things is like Pain. Pain is funny. Okay, so The Office is all about just working in an office and working with the types of people that you work with there. And I've talked about my experience probably more than I should, and it's painful. And I watch the show now after having the experiences. I liked the show before, but now that I've been in an office, it's like, wow, that is exactly what they do. And it is awful. But seeing somebody else go through it and then like have the same reaction is funny. It's like getting to see somebody else have that pain is funny. And and even describing it as painful is funny. And what do you have to say about what do you use for jokes? I know we talked about when we were talking about making characters likable that there is a naivety component to the comedy you use. But we've had some really funny characters, and not to put words in your mouth, but my thought is that what you do really well is make your characters act in a way that you don't expect. And that's where the comedy comes from in my perspective, but you may have a different perspective on that.
Yeah, I was going to say something along those lines, because I would like to think that I'm funny, but I don't necessarily have like a joke. If someone were like, hey, tell a joke, do stand up for 3 minutes, I would freeze and I wouldn't know what to do. My comedy is just more situational. I can be funny at work, but again, it's situational. It's with the people that I'm with. I wouldn't be able to make those jokes outside of work because you wouldn't necessarily get it, And same, I can joke with you about our campaign or about something that we deal with, or something that's personal to us. But if I joke about that or make that inside joke at work, no one's gonna get it. So it's situational, and that's how I get my characters to be funny, is because in that situation, what is something unexpected but humorous that would create some type of reaction from everybody? Like you said, like pain, it's funny. Falls, funny. Like you typically can't go wrong with that. And then just like silly situations that as an adult you wouldn't expect. Like we talked about in a previous podcast about, the Joker is fun and kind of humorous and some of the things that he does. As an adult, doing some of those like fun things and describing those fun, different, wacky things that we're taught not to do anymore because you're an adult, bring those into the game, right? I think I described at one party after y'all defeated a big boss that there was a little gnomish person being thrown around as part of the revelry that was going on, right?
And the party gnome lives on. He's been in every party we've had since.
Yeah. So, something silly like that to create that humor and to create some type of investment in y'all. It's situational. I don't always, again, the great thing about D&D is it's improv. So something I didn't plan for, didn't intend to create, but just felt right in the moment. Just throw it in there, and now it's a character that I gotta put some work behind.
Yeah, I find like within D&D, sarcastic characters almost never work, and that's really interesting to me. Have you noticed that?
Yes, because like it's already a fantasy world that to try and be sarcastic sometimes will miss the mark or offend someone when you don't mean to. So I'm actually in another campaign I'm playing, I am a little sassy because I have some younger kids with me. So whenever they throw an idea out, I know it's funny to everyone because I'm like, so you want to go and attack this castle in the middle of the day that's got patrols on it, and that's the plan of action that we're gonna have. And like I can see people reacting and laughing to it, like, yes, that is what my character is saying. So
yeah,
it works sometimes. I think when you're writing or in film or in TV, you can see like a sarcastic player or a sarcastic character can work, but I think the writing has to be there, the reaction has to be there. You can't just have a mean sarcastic character.
Yeah, I think like Robert Downey Jr. is the only person who can really pull that off and still be likable.
And again, that's like the writing and the persona of, you know, Tony Stark, and then personifying those two characters as the same. He acts like Tony Stark would, you know? And so it's funny because we know it's not him, but he's acting it up, you know? So
yeah, I think just thinking about the campaign we did, the pirate campaign, that what I did that worked, at least got people laughing, was I mean, basically I do accents or different voices for just about every one of my characters, which is I have the added element of that sometimes I drop out of character, and so sometimes it just sounds terrible. So that's a moment, but what I have done to good effect is that I'll have 5 NPCs there, and then I'll sort of argue with myself for about 30 seconds and just switch voices as fast as I can. Yeah. And I find if I ramp up the pace, then it's almost like people are giggling instinctually, because they're like, it's happening so fast, and it's like it's a little bit funny, but because so much of it happens at once, it's like critical mass. You just reach a laugh, and I find that true of writing too. If you can be brief and just add one thing, then by the end of it, it's like it's kind of a funny situation. You get somebody to laugh out loud,
and it's always funny as a DM or a GM. When you have to talk to yourself, especially quickly and over an extended amount of time, like it's kind of a lot of voices going on in your head, and you're having to voice it all, and people are just watching and having to be like, you created this for yourself and now live with it. It's a unique experience, I believe.
I think something else that's helped me find a vibe when I'm writing, especially one that funks, really particularly Funkadelic vibe, is that however I'm feeling or however I can personify it out loud, I write it down with those physical movements. So like when I'm really happy, I want to move and I want to joke and I want to laugh. And so that's kind of like, and I'm usually in a non-life-threatening, non-super emotional moment. So it's like you have your setting. And so just using this just as an exercise, just use the first thing that you think of when you have a certain emotion. So if it's happiness, then we've done an exponential thinking episode before, of just how to keep adding information. So go back and listen to that, but use that and create a world around your impression of that emotion, and then write it out long form, 2-3 pages. I can't imagine it being longer, but you might be that kind of person where you want to write that much, but then go to anger or go to fear. And then do the same thing. Create your 1 or 2 pages about that emotion for you, very specifically for you, and not a character. And then when you go back and read, you're going to see that you naturally drew from the art you've experienced in your life, by using words like creek and cold or darkness or whatever. You're going to start seeing that you're going to use the tropes naturally. And then when you go back, again, this is a long exercise if you did all the emotions, but if you just do one, then read it the first time, figure out what worked for you, what you liked the most, and then rewrite it once and try to lean into it 110%. It's going to be all happiness this time, every bit. And then the final write through, you take out anything that you feel like you've seen somewhere else. So like for happy, and I say it was a sunny day, get rid of that. That is so tired and run down. Don't use that. Right. Use only the things that are specific to you and like cue off a memory of joy or happiness. And then, compare and contrast first and last draft. And you'll see, like, not only you'll see your own voice a little bit, but you'll see kind of the mechanics behind creating that emotion, at least in you.
Yeah.
And that's a good start to say, well, my language is going to change when I introduce this scene. Like once you've got a good idea of what you create per scene, then when you're in the middle of writing, you can just say, oh, this is going to be a happy scene. It's different because of what character I'm writing, but there is a very defined emotional arc I can use to get them to a happy place.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm real big on creating framework for when you get lost, and we'll talk about writer's block next time. But when I get lost, I like to go back to the framework, and the framework to me is like making sure you have a very clear idea of almost like, if you wanted to, you could pull out all your adjectives and adverbs. I don't know how anal retentive you are, but for me, it's like I'm going to remember as I'm writing what words I use to describe which things. So I usually don't pull them out, but I'll go back and reference if I can't remember a word.
Mm-hmm. But
basically, I'll have a list of adverbs and adjectives, descriptive words to refer back to and say, okay, happy, this is my word list, and I'm going to work from that in my new situation.
Gotcha.
And then when I go back to rewrite, then I'll rework it to words that maybe work better, but at least I'll have, I learned this from writing lyrics, right? So you need rhymes at the end of the poem. So red, and then the next line I know is going to be dead, but I don't know how I'm going to get there.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of what I do when I'm lost in writing, is like, well, what kind of scene is this? This is a word I can use. I'm going to work a sentence that ends there. And that sort of like breaks up the monotony, or like if in one writing session, I go from this really dark moment, chapter change, and we're starting off with someone happy. It's really hard for me to switch my tone.
Mm-hmm.
So like this terrible thing just happened, and I still kind of feel the emotions of that because I have, you have to personify it a little bit to write it. And then you just have to sort of drop into happy, and that's hard to do for me at least. And so it's good to have a reference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. I just talked a lot.
Yeah.
Whoa.
No, it's good. It's very interesting to hear, like, kind of how that thought process works for you when you're talking about like an emotion, and here's everything that goes along with it. Something that I like to do if I'm not in a spot where I can use all the words, or don't have something to reference back to, I will just write something, and at the top in like an italics or in brackets say like, this is the tone I'm going for, right? I want this to be a creepy scene. I want this to be a humorous or laughing scene. So then I can just write down kind of the actions of what's going on. And then when I revisit it, I can go, okay, what's the verbiage? What are the adjectives? What are the words that I need to write in here to make this story go from, mundane, this person passed this person and they noticed something weird. Okay, why did they notice something weird? Okay, let's go and take a look at that. All right, what word usage am I going to use now? Am I going to be, more like a suspenseful, more horror, more jokey? Like what emotion is he feeling? Is he feeling nervous, excited, curious? Like kind of go through those range of adjectives, and then I just start kind of like adding them in. So then it's not this person passed this person and noticed this. It turns into, as he was walking by, he checked this guy who was passing him. He couldn't recognize and scanned him up and down. And, you start creating a little bit more of the verbiage that you're going into. But it's good to have that reference and that framework of emotion. Here are all the words for it. Because that's something I typically don't do, but could probably use in my writing.
There's some other tool that I heard recently in a book I was reading where it was almost every paragraph. It wasn't exact like that, but there was a argument between internal and external exposition, right? So he was talking about what he was thinking, or the author was describing what his character was thinking, and then the author was describing what was going on in the world. And so he would switch back and forth. But so what happens when you're writing is you want to describe everything that's going on in each place.
Mm-hmm.
And what he would do, I believe, I didn't ask him, but but what I think was happening from my own writing is that, you ruin the pacing when you explain everything, for one. And then for two, you lose any intensity. And so it's like you want to keep the pace moving forward. You want people to stay invested in the action that's happening. So it was almost every paragraph, the next description of what was happening occurred, whether or not the mental train of thought was ready for it. And then so it became this sort of like very beautiful train of thought where it was like, when we get in our own heads, we start thinking and then we get thrown off by something that happens. And then it was thrown off and included what the original train of thought was. And then the next paragraph's the same thing, right? Until the event that you couldn't avoid happens and he's called to reality to act, right?
Yeah.
And it was just really interesting because I feel like I'm an overthinker. So it was it was a big sort of victory for me to see it in work, see it in reality, see it out in the field. So I read their book and I really enjoyed it because it does both. Well, I'm repeating myself now.
That would be extremely tough for me because I
try it. It's good.
Yeah, I do get interrupted with my thoughts a lot. Because of the jobs I've had to come to terms with literally stopping a conversation and knowing I'm never going to finish that conversation ever again and being okay with it because of how often it happens. So I feel like for me and my creative style, like I would be losing it to be like, dude, just finish your thought. Like, just finish your thought. I know things are happening, but just finish it, But that's just me personally.
But so like when that works, it's like the vibe that creates is basically the person is avoiding the decision in front of them. Like you hit on it perfectly. They're trying to not interact with what's in front of them.
I see.
And so it's like they have this internal thought that is more important than what's going on around them at the time.
Gotcha.
And then another thing happens and you're like, they really need to pay attention to this. And it's sort of like it builds anticipation.
Ooh, that's good.
It seems to naturally, like it didn't really in that scene, not in like a ramping up kind of way. It was like a middle of a chapter, not end of chapter kind of deal, if that makes sense. But it feels like that's a natural build type of scene. Like I've used it in Under Eve, that story, one of the stories I've been working on. I know I talked about it on the podcast at some point, but where the first scene is exactly that. He's all in his own head. It's first person. And we find out very early, spoiler alert, that somebody is coming to get him. But instead of protecting himself, he's just sitting there chilling at the bar. Right. And being introspective because he feels like he can't get away. That's the mechanical reason. But anyway, it's like we keep getting called back to reality, called back to reality, called back to reality. And then finally the action happens and it's just a way to build that or ramp up to something, especially to start. It's like it's I like using mechanical or like trope things to start a story because then regardless of whether you've got a good story, at least you have a good beginning. I get myself the out of like, the story might be bad. I can fix that later, but at least the opening scene works.
Right.
You know, I put that in my head as a safeguard, basically.
Yeah. You also got to have like, especially when you're beginning, like the vibe has to be right. So that you, when you come back to it, are in, if you reread your work, you're like, oh, this is the vibe I was going for. This is how I'm trying to build this. If it's interesting to you, then it's going to be probably interesting to somebody else as well.
Yeah, I tried that story in particular. I tried to start about 5 different times. I don't remember thank goodness, right? For everybody listening, I don't remember all 5 of the iterations, but one of the earlier ones was Basically, he's in the middle of combat with this like super soldier that's coming after him. And then the second one is like he's trying to drink himself to death. And the third one was the one I already talked about, that he's like keeps getting called back to reality. That one worked really good. And then there is like more of a flashback one that I was working on recently where he basically starts off in sort of what shows his normal day-to-day job is sort of chaotic to introduce the fact that his brain works like that.
Oh, gotcha.
So like he likes faster paced stuff. And so that's where we're going to find him. And then later when you're introduced to this, this mechanic, then you're going to be like, oh, okay, yeah, this makes sense because of who he is. So I feel like it'll hit better if it's not the opening sequence. So anyway, that's a hobby. I spend way too long doing hobby things.
Writing?
Writing.
It's good. It's good though.
Yeah. So if you were to sum up creating a Funkadelic vibe, how would you do it?
Pacing and emotion, I think, are going to be the biggest things, specifically when you're writing, so that you can get a good pace going, or whatever pace you're trying to look for, whether it's a chaotic pace, a smooth pacing of just introducing the world. I feel like a smoother pacing would be like if you look at Lord of the Rings post, like the credits when like Gandalf was coming into the Shire. Like I feel like that's a smooth pacing. You're describing the world that's going on, or like kind of the chaotic pacing that you were talking about, where you're in their mind world. And then, like I said, the vocabulary that you use, I think those are kind of the pillars of creating a good vibe.
Well, so here's a question that brought up for me is, how do you choose which pacing or which vibe to follow? So like Lord of the Rings, Bilbo had a certain pace. He was very laid back. He's getting ready for his birthday. Gandalf had a different pace because he needed to figure out where the ring was and to get it someplace safe. So he had some urgency. Frodo had no idea what the hell was going on.
Right.
So like, how do you choose which path to follow? And as far as like the world of Lord of the Rings, it feels very slow, methodic. It feels very much like time passes normally, like it does in our world, right? Even though there's a lot of events, they don't unfold quickly. So it's very sort of like omnipotent vibe that you get from the world.
It's like a grandiose fantasy story vibe.
Yeah. So how do you choose which one to embody for your scene? How do you?
I guess like it's really tough, right? Like, what is the story you're going to tell? Is it going to be this grand adventure of going and trying to face adversity and take the ring back to Mordor? Or is it going to be more of a grimy, gritty story where
we follow Gollum?
yeah. I mean, and you see things through his perspective, maybe. And it also depends on the audience, right? So again, going back to D&D or whatever your audience is going to be, knowing the audience and knowing what they enjoy in the vibe and knowing what they can handle with the vibe, right? So like where y'all are at in y'all's campaign setting, if all of a sudden the vibe was humorous and funny and kind of like a lovey-dovey vibe, like it would feel out of place and would probably like take you out of the immersion. But if it's, another handful of vibes that I'm trying to go for, like, potentially suspense or action or, there was like a chase sequence that I put you guys through, and I was really trying to like push y'all to make decisions real quick. It was like, you know, you're on this carriage, you're driving the horse. Like, what are you doing? Are you going to try and steer the horse? Are you going to try to attack what's attacking you? You're like, well, I'm going to try and do both. I was like, okay, you can try it. And so like I was trying to get the pacing, you know, and trying to like push y'all to make decisions really quick. If I would have changed the vibe, it would have been a totally different, you know, setting. If there wasn't any build up, then it would have taken you out of the immersion, I guess.
Yeah, well, I think it's a good contrast between the campaign that you've run and the sort of short campaign that we did for the pirate one, because for the pirate one, it was all silly, more or less. And it was like we got to the BBEG, big bad evil guy, and it was maybe an hour and a half, 2 hour battle, which, if you're familiar with D&D, is very short. Yeah. Especially for like the crescendo of your campaign. It's like that is very, very short. But for the campaign that I was running, that was a long time. That was a long, drawn out battle for the campaign I was running. And so I felt like, not as a player, but I felt like it ended well for what it was, and it allowed everybody to have their victorious moment within it. And since it wasn't really a grimy or like a your character might die kind of campaign, it was like it worked out good. But if you, like you're saying, if I put that into your campaign, it would feel silly, because it's like a plan well or die. And if you're going to kick the hornet's nest, then you know what's going to happen, right? Right. And that's very much the campaign that you run, and I feel like that comes down to everything. If I might describe it, it's like. Even in our shopping days, and again, this is going to sound weird if you're not familiar with D&D, but in our shopping days, it's like that can take a whole session. In our adventuring days, that can take a whole session. In our battling days, that can take multiple sessions. It's like everything has a time and everything has a consequence. And so we have to sit and think about it. And on days when internally, for whatever reason, because of life, it's like you are not having an easy time making decisions, and then you sit down to play, it's like, well, it's going to take me even longer now. Yeah. It feels like the stakes are so high. What can I do? Yeah. And
sometimes like that's the beauty of D&D is I get to adjust the vibe and be like, maybe, you know, we're not going to be as serious today, you know, like let's be a little bit more laid back. Let's do a little bit more role playing. Let's not do as much tactical stuff. And that might be you as a creative, as a writer, you're just not feeling it. And so, man, just write the vibe that you're feeling. Because if you're really writing, if you're really, you know, trying to finish some type of writing, you're probably writing 4 to 6 times out of the week, right? Vibe with it, vibe with a different scene, vibe with the emotion that you're going with, because you're not going to be in that headspace all the time, and get it down on paper. It might be therapeutic for you. And that's how you could write something completely different from your scene or your story. And it can just be something you're writing, but you're still putting that vibe down on the table. For us in D&D, I just changed the vibe based off of the feedback I'm getting from you guys. And that's how you kind of choose it, especially with D&D. Like I come in with an idea, but it can always change. And same thing when you're writing, same thing when you're trying to create, you can just, the vibe might change.
Yeah, I feel like when I'm writing, I have probably 2-3 scenes that I could write at any given writing session. And then I feel like there is 3 or 4 that are sort of like, they're not in the outline, but they're things that I think might be fun. And whether, you know, fun just meaning that I think it could be interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I have maybe 6 different things I can choose from anytime I sit down. And that's usually the extent of my most frequented emotions. so that I have something I can write and sit with and feel like, okay, like there was a scene in the first book I wrote, which none of these are published, so don't judge me. But the first one I wrote, there was a scene where basically, somebody, it's these two witches vying for supremacy, and basically they have this almost like week lead up to their final battle, and in that they're really just doing the most like heinous shit that they can do to each other. Mm-hmm. And in a way to scare each other off because they're both afraid of each other's power. Right. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't write that for maybe like a period of 2 weeks. I just was not in the headspace of that. It was like there were some other characters in the book that were a little bit younger, a little more flippant, and still had some more story to tell. So I wrote them. Mm-hmm. Because I was in a pretty good place, felt pretty good, and I didn't want to torture anybody mentally that day. So, so when I finally, just like woke up on the wrong side of the bed one day, and I was like, "Oh, sweet, today is the day I get to use that." I get to use that for something artistic, thank goodness. I was excited. I woke up ticked off, like it's just
nice.
How many times in your life you get to say that? So, so I sat down and I wrote it. I think it was like 4,000 or 5,000 words. I sat down the whole day and just typed. Mm-hmm. That was a good memory. That was a good time. But, nice. But anyway, I waited and was patient with myself that one time. I'm not saying I always do that, but that one time I was patient, and it paid off in spades by letting myself be in the place I needed to be to create the vibe. Mm-hmm. So hopefully you found a way to keep yourself funkadelic when you're creating your art, whatever that art might be. Thank you to Michael Vasquez for coming on once again.
Thank you for having me again. I appreciate it very much.
And thank you to the creative thinkers all around the globe. You guys take care. Bye-bye.